After having covered the Gestalt principles, we're now moving on to face perception. There is a visual system that is sensitive to faces. We can more readily discern information about a person's mood, attentiveness, sex, race, and age by looking at a person's face than by listening to them talk, watching them walk, or studying their clothing. Prosopagnosia is deficits in the ability to recognize faces. People that suffer from this condition kind of see your face as more of a blurry or mosaic tile blur kind of thing. There are cortical regions, even specific neurons seem to be specialized to perceive faces and are sensitive to facial expression and gaze detection. This area is called the fusiform gyrus. Researchers found that people more quickly and accurately recognize angry facial expressions than happy ones. The researchers found that most people recognize anger more quickly on a man's face than on a woman's, and they found the reverse for happiness. According to evolutionary psychology, there is an adaptive advantage to the detection of angry faces. Here's an example of strange places that we can perceive faces. A face that appears to be crying can be seen in the dramatic photo of a Norwegian glacier. The Thatcher illusion. This effect got its name because it was first studied using photos of a former British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher. Here, the two inverted pictures of Mila Kunis look normal. Turn this image upside down to reveal the different perspective. We tend to see the two faces as identical because the overall configuration is similar, and we fail to notice the distortion. This effect implies that we pay most attention to the eyes and mouth. As long as those features are oriented correctly, the rest of the face appears normal, even if it is not. Her smile is turned upside down in the picture on the right. Perception is guided by cues in the environment. When we look at an array of objects and a photograph of that array, both senses create the exact same image on the retina. Despite the inherent ambiguity, we do not confuse the real, three-dimensional scene with the two-dimensional picture of it. Why not? This is because of depth perception. How are we able to construct a three-dimensional mental representation of the visual world from two-dimensional retinal input? It involves binocular depth cues and monocular depth cues. Binocular depth cues are cues of depth perception that arise from the fact that people have two eyes. Monocular depth cues are cues of depth perception that are available to each eye alone. All right, more on depth perception. Binocular disparity or retinal disparity. This is a depth cue. Because of the distance between the two eyes, each eye receives a slightly different retinal image. The brain uses the disparity between these two retinal images to compute distances to nearby objects. This involves stereoscopic vision. This is the ability to determine an object's depth based on the object's projections to each eye. All right, here's a graphic from the book about binocular disparity. To demonstrate your own binocular disparity, hold one of your index fingers out in front of your face and close first one eye and then the other. Your finger appears to move because each eye, due to its position relative to the finger, has a unique retinal image. All right, this involves convergence. It's a cue of binocular depth perception. When a person views a nearby object, the eye muscles turn the eyes inward. Here's an example of convergence. When viewing things at a distance, the eyes aim out on parallel lines. As an object approaches, the eyes converge. To demonstrate such convergence, hold one of your index fingers out in front of your face about a foot away. Slowly bring your finger towards your eyes. Do you notice your eyes converging? We can perceive depth with one eye because of monocular depth cues. This involves pictorial depth cues: occlusion, relative size, and familiar size. Occlusion is a near object occludes or blocks an object that is farther away. Relative size is far off objects project a smaller retinal image than close objects do, if the far off and close objects are the same physical size. Familiar size. Because we know how large familiar objects are, we can tell how far away they are by the size of their retinal image. All right, some other things that go with depth perception are linear perspective, texture gradient, and position relative to horizon. In a linear perspective, seemingly parallel lines appear to converge in the distance. With texture gradient, as a uniformly textured surface recedes, its texture continuously becomes denser. And position relative to horizon, all else being equal, objects below the horizon that appear higher in the visual field are perceived as being farther away. Objects above the horizon that appear lower in the visual field are perceived as being closer. Pictorial depth cues. In this photo, the cues to depth include occlusion because the woman's head is blocking the building, and that is the letter A. And the letter B there on the screen is the person next to her, the person relative to the horizon, because the woman seems nearer than the people and the objects on the sidewalk. C, which is over on the sidewalk at the crosswalk. Relative size, because this man projects a smaller retinal image than the men crossing the street. And letter D is over where the car is, familiar size. Since our knowledge of car sizes let us estimate how far away this car is by the size of its retinal image. And E, linear perspective, because the lines of the sidewalk appear to converge in the distance. And lastly, F, texture gradient, because the pattern on the pavement becomes denser as the surface recedes from the view. By that they mean the white bars of the crosswalk look closer and closer together the farther away they are. Size perception. The size of an object's retinal image depends on that object's distance from the observer. To determine an object's size, the visual system needs to know how far away the object is. Depth cues can fool us into seeing depth when it is not there. A lack of depth cues can fool us into not seeing depth when it is there. Distance perception. This picture captures what appears to be a tiny person standing on another person's head. This illusion occurs because the photo fails to present depth information. It does not convey the hill on which the person is standing behind him. I have a similar image here. That is me on the chair and Dr. Verikan with the axe. It looks like I'm very small sitting in a chair next to him, but this is at a psychology conference we went to. I'm actually like 15 feet away, more in the corner of the room there, standing on a white platform that just lines up perfectly to look like a chair in the foreground. All right, more on size perception. Ames boxes. They were first crafted in the 1940s by Albert Ames, a painter turned scientist. Ames boxes rooms play with linear perspectives and other distance cues to create size illusions. Here's an example of an Ames box. Ames played with the depth cues to create size illusions. For example, he made a diagonally cut room appear rectangular by using crooked windows and floor tiles. When one child stands in a near corner and another of similar height stands in a far corner, the room creates the illusion that they are equidistant from the viewer. Therefore, the closer child looks like a giant compared with the child farther away. The Ponzo illusion, first described by psychologist Mario Ponzo in 1913, is another classic example of the size-distance illusion. Monocular depth cues make the two-dimensional figure seem three-dimensional. This illusion shows how much we rely on depth perception to gauge size. The brain uses depth cues even when depth is absent. Here's an example of the Ponzo illusion. The two horizontal lines appear to be different sizes but are actually the same length. All right, moving on to motion perception. How does the brain know what is moving? After receiving damage to secondary visual areas of her brain, areas critical for motion perception, MP, a German woman, saw the world as a series of snapshots rather than as a moving image. Neurons specialized for detecting movement fire when movement occurs. The rotating snake's illusion. This illusion was created by psychologist Akiyoshi Kataoka, who has specialized in visual perception. Look at the scene for a few minutes. Do you notice some of the distant snakes revolving? The snakes are not moving. Their rotation is caused at least partially by your eye movements. Even as you hold your head what you think is perfectly still, there are still little motions going on in your eyes. One way this happens is blood flow in and out of your eyeball. Motion after effects, or waterfall effect. If you stare at a waterfall and then turn away, the scenery you are now looking at will seem to move upward. The visual cortex has neurons that respond to movement in a given direction. When you stare at a moving stimulus long enough, these direction-specific neurons adapt to the motion and become fatigued. When the stimulus is removed, other motion detectors that respond to all other directions are more active than the fatigued motion detectors. Alright, and here's my favorite example of motion detection. I could try to bring it up here. I almost have it pulled up. I'll try a little bit. No, it's going to be too hard. So what you need to do is type in this address and go to that location. It'll then show you a GIF, and on the top portion of the GIF will be a spiral that you stare at for 30 seconds, and on the bottom will be Van Gogh's Starry Night. When you type in this address, go ahead and click the mouse on the image. It'll then load the image up into a larger area. And it'll make it easier to see. So then you stare at the spiral image for 30 seconds. Real seconds, Mississippi's, or thousands. Then you look at Van Gogh's Starry Night, and lots of things in the image are still going to be moving because of that motion after effect. Alright, I'm moving on with motion perception. Stereoscopic movement is a perceptual illusion that occurs when two or more slightly different images are presented in rapid succession. How moving pictures work. This static series would appear transformed if you spun the wheel. With the slightly different images presented in rapid succession, the stereoscopic movement would tell your brain that you were watching a moving zebra. This is how the earliest movies were made. They were put in wooden boxes, and they were called Nickelodeons. That's what that channel is named after. So you could put a coin into the Nickelodeon and you could watch a short movie. Alright, moving on from motion perception. How does the brain know that a person is 6 feet tall when the retinal image of that person changes size according to how near or far the person is? Object constancy. Correctly perceiving objects as constant in their shape, size, color, and lightness despite raw sensory data that could mislead perception. Alright, object constancy involves 4 individual constancies: size constancy, shape, color, and lightness. With size constancy, we need to know how far away the object is from us. In shape constancy, we need to know what angle or angles we are seeing the object from. And in color constancy, we need to compare the wavelengths of light reflected from the object with those reflected from its background. And lightness constancy, we need to know how much light is being reflected from the object and from its background.